Hello everyone, this is Fawad. Welcome to Future on Cloud. This is the continuity of Azure from Scratch video series. In our last video, we have configured our public load balancer. Now it's time to play with the internal load balancer and zone redundant load balancer. So let's jump into it. These are the things which we have already configured. Probably in load balancer. The public one which we have configured in our last video. Now we will play around internal load balancer. What is internal load balancer? Internal load balancer is, as you can see in the picture, it will balance the load of your internal traffic to your distributed virtual machines. Let's say, for example, you have one web server, and just to achieve the redundancy, you have created three database servers. So you wanted to balance the load, whatever the traffic coming from your internal network, that will land it on your internal load balancer virtual IP, and this load balancer distribute the load across these three virtual machines. So in this lab, I'm going to cover two topics. One is internal load balancer that you can create within the region or within the same zone, or you can create with three different zones. So I'll go ahead with the three different zones because I wanted to cover the zone redundancy as well. So let's jump into our lab environment and then I'll show you how you can configure it. So I just log in on my Azure portal. First of all, we need to create the virtual machines as mentioned in the DB tier. I will create three VMs. One will be in zone 1, second will be in zone 2, and third will be on zone 3. Let me select my subscription. So far, nothing is created. So let's click on Create Azure Virtual Machine. I'm not going to create a virtual network. It will create automatically. If there is a specific requirement, you wanted to use a specific network, then you go ahead and create your virtual network. If you don't know how to create it, you can refer to my previous videos where I have shown how you can create your virtual network. So I'm going to use suppose your resource group. VM name is PB01 and region is Middle East Qatar Central. There is a list of regions which can provide you the, the availability zone because it is not available for all all the regions. So I'll select zone 1. Uh, this is the list which is available on the Microsoft site. Azure region with availability zone support. So these are the region which supports zone-based redundancy. So the first VM I'm going to create in zone 1, DB01 will be in zone 1, 02 will be in zone 2, and DB03 will be in zone 3. So the virtual machine, I will select the center and I need to one vCPU 3.5 GB of memory. That's fine. So just give it a name, the password. Let me type it in my notepad, then I'll copy paste because it's a 12 character length, so there is a chance you can mistype it. To avoid it, better to type it. And select the inbound role as in fact it will be a database server. So just for the demonstration purpose, I will configure IaaS and try to access from any client machine to see the load balance. But in actual environment, you can configure your database ports from network security group. Mm. So far, I am going with HTTP and HTTPS and RDP. For licensing part, let's use the one which we already have, and networking it will create automatically. Right now it is creating with DB01. It as you create a VM, it will detect and create the network for with the same name. If you wanted to avoid it, you can go ahead and create a virtual network and give it your own name. If you want, you can create from here as well. And just click this box, remove, leave it as it is. The management, that's fine. Just click create. So this is our first virtual machine. So once it start deployment, we'll go ahead and create the second one, then third one in respective zones. Those who are not aware about what is region and what is zone, let me explain you. The region basically a geographical location or a country, you can say, but one country can have different region if that country is bigger enough. But just for sake of demonstration, you can refer to Azure region as a country. And availability zone is a different physical locations where you can have a physical data center. As mentioned in the definition which I took from the Microsoft site, a region is a set of data center deployed within a latency defined perimeter and connect through a dedicated regional low latency network. It means they are connected with physical fiber, physical dark fiber with latency of 2 milliseconds. And the availability zone, Azure availability zone are physically and logically separated data center with their own independent power source network and cooling. So this data center have its own power source network and cooling, and this is another data center which is called availability zone 2, and this is another data center called availability zone 3. So right now I am creating one virtual machine in this data center, you can say, and the next VM I will create in this data center, and the third VM I will create in this data center. So the first VM, I believe it, okay, it's deployed. So let's go ahead and create another one. So one VM is ready. Select your resource group, give it a name DB02 and availability zone. If you don't want to configure in zone redundancy, you can configure it within the same zone, which so if you wanted to configure within the same zone, then you have to select this availability set. You can refer to my previous video where I have configured the availability set within the same zone. So far I'm going with the availability zone, and the one is it's DB02 will be in zone 2 just to correlate it. That is the reason I'm selecting these options. It is not mandatory. You can have your database 1 in zone 3 and 2 in zone 1 and 3 in zone 2. It's up to you. And username you can have a different one, but I'm using same just to avoid any confusion. This is fine, network is fine, and remove this public IP as I remove this virtual machine. You can also configure this VM under the load balancer from here, but for that you have to configure the load balancer earlier prior to configure this virtual machine. But so far I am just I'm just following the best practice. Just create your virtual machine first, then you can create your load balancer. But due to some reason, if you already created your load balancer and you wanted to add more virtual machine within the same load balancer, then you can add your virtual machine in the load balancer during this visit. If your workload required to have more virtual machine within the same zone or availability set, it's up to you. So the second VM deployment is in process. So meanwhile, let's go ahead and create a third VM, which will be again in the same resource group, and DB03 will be the third VM availability zone, and it will be in zone 3. Security will be standard, and let's copy paste the password. HTTP, HTTPS. I will use my own license. Next, next, and delete this one. That's fine. So the deployment is started. Now second virtual machine is also configured. As you can see, DB1, DB2 is in running state. So let's go ahead and configure our internal load balancer. And in this topology, the port is 443, which is for HTTPS, but I am going to use port 80 for HTTP traffic. So let's go ahead and configure our load balancer. You can select this load balancer. If it is not available here, you can simply type load balancer and which is available here, just click on it. Yeah. So click on create load balancer. DB LB database load balancer. Region is Qatar and QO is standard and it is our internal load balancer, right? Now we need to create a front end IP address. So our third machine is also ready. Front end IP. This is the subnet and it is zone redundant, right? Just review and create. The remaining thing we will configure once this load balancer is created. Like backend pool and inbound rule we will configure once it is complete. It will take a couple of seconds. So let's wait for a while. So now our load balancer is in deployment process. So once it is done, we will configure it. Okay, the deployment is completed. So just click on DBLB, which we have just created. The front end IP we have configured during the deployment. Now we need to configure our backend pool. What is backend pool? In backend pool, you have to add the virtual machine which will take part or which will share the load from your end user. So it's DB pool. Just name it as per your requirement. So it's DB pool basically. So I'll select all these three virtual machines and click save. So whenever the traffic comes in from the websites, these three database virtual machine will clear the load. Let the deployment complete, then we will go ahead and configure the health probes. Okay, so it is completed now. I think so. It's still deployment in progress, so let's wait for a while. Okay, the deployment is completed now. So let's go ahead and configure health probe. Health probe basically check the availability and the health status of these virtual machines. It will check the availability of port 80 and the interval is 5 seconds. If one VM is not responding, then it will declare that uh, thing goes wrong with that virtual machine and it will not send the request. Okay, now it is done. Now the last step is to configure the load balancer rule. So the name can be DB LB role. The front end IP is one and the backend pool which we have just created and the port is 80 which we are going to configure and I'll probably just create it and click save. So now we have configured this part. We have created three virtual machines in three different zones and now we have configured our load balancer. Now we need to create a virtual machine through which we can test if that load balancer is balancing the load across three virtual machines. So just go ahead and create a fourth virtual machine. Again, I'll select the same one and I'll create 01. Again, I can choose zone 1. It is not really mandatory. You have to select the availability zone. You can go ahead and configure it without availability zone as well. It will work. But in the next lab, I wanted to show you the complete picture of public load balancer, internal load balancer, and zone-based redundant load balancer. So that is the reason I'm selecting it. Just for the sake of the next lab, I am selecting these options. Otherwise, it is not really required. And just create it. So meanwhile, this VM is in creation process. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and configure IAS server on our database VMs so that we can test if the load is being distributed across these virtual machines. So let it deploy. Let's go ahead and configure the IAS server on DB1, 2, and 3. As I don't have database right now and I'm not DB expert, so that is the reason I'm not dealing with the DB. But just for sake of the training purpose, I can. Okay, let me connect with DB1 first. It's asking for the credentials. So I'm able to log in on the DB01. So let me connect with DB02 and 3 as well. Then I will configure the IAS altogether. It's DB02. This is my DB02 and let's go ahead with DB03 now. Okay, this is my DB03. So let me shift it to this screen, DB03. And where is my DB0? DB02 and okay. Well, this is my DB02. Okay, let me move it to in the center and DB01. This is DB01. Okay, let's install IAS first. But in actual environment, it can be database. Okay, let it install. Let me go ahead on DB02. Now on DB03. Okay, let's code because I have selected very minimum resources, so that is the reason it's taking time. Oh, it's 3.5 GB of RAM and one socket, one CPU. That is the reason it's taking time. Okay, next. All right, so let's look into DB01. If it is all installed, okay, it's done. So let me go ahead and create a website page. And see init pub www root and remove these files and let's create our own file. Okay, welcome. This is DB01 installed in zone 1, right? So let's save as the same location and name it index.html and here select all files. Okay, close it. So this page is available. Okay, welcome to Feature on Cloud. This is DB01 installed in Zone 1. Great. So let me copy the same file and install it in DB02. Okay, IS is installed. So just close it and come on. Just remove these files, paste it. Just wanted to make sure this is DB02. Okay, the VM name is DB02. So just change it to DB02 and it is in zone 2. Okay, then save as with the same index.html and select all file type. All right. So this is done. Just copy the same file and go to our DB3. Okay, IIS is installed here as well. Go to File Explorer. Init path www root. Paste it here and remove these two default files. And this is our DB3, which is installed in zone 3. And just save as index.html and then all right. So our servers are configured. So now it's time to test them through Web01. So prior to test, let me have a look what is the IP of our load balancer through which we are going to access it. Click on see more and this is the IP 10007. Just copy it. So now what we are going to do now from this virtual machine, I am going to access the internal load balancer IP which is 10007 and let's see on which VM it routes us. So let me open another tab. Little bit slow. Just bear with me. Okay, the virtual machine. This is my subscription. And in this VM, we have Web01 VM. As this VM is also residing in the same VNet, so that is the reason we can access it. Okay, so what is the IP? Okay, this is the private IP 10008. And now we are going to access our 10007, the load balancer IP. Okay, Web01. Let me connect it. Okay, type the credentials. Okay, this is my Web01 VM. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to access this load balancer IP from this virtual machine. Its IP is 10008 and the load balancer IP is 10007 and it will distribute our traffic to these VMs if everything is configured properly. All right, so let's go ahead and open the browser. Okay, start without syncing, continue browsing. All right, so let's paste the IP of our uh, the load balancer. So it take us to DB01 installed on zone 2. So let's refresh it. Still we are on zone 2. So now the reason behind is, let me take you to the portal. So in the load balancer, somewhere in the, no, not here, the load balancing rule. Idle timeout in minutes, and the minimum is 4 minutes. What does it mean? It's keep the TCP or HTTP connection open without relying on client to send the keep alive messages. So what does it mean? If you keep trying from the one system, it will give you access to the same machine. So if your session remain idle for 4 minutes, then your session will be disconnected from this from this VM, and then after 4 minutes, if you refresh it, it will take you to another browser. So let me try it in incognito mode. Let's see on which VM it take us to. Still it is on zone 2. So if I try after 4 minutes, then it will route our traffic to maybe on DB01 or DB03. So in the meanwhile, what I will do is I'll create two more virtual machines in this web tier subnet in order to show you the regional zone redundant load balancer. So in zone redundant load balancer, what will happen is, uh, in zone redundant, your public traffic will be distributed across the different zone within the same region. And so in case of failure of one data center within the same region in one zone, still your traffic will be routed to zone 2 or zone 3 and your service will not be interrupted. So this is the function of zone redundant load balancer. Let me show you how you can configure it. So if you look at the definition which I took from the Microsoft site, in a region with availability zone, a standard load balancer can be zone redundant with the traffic served by a single IP address. So the single IP address will reside on this load balancer. So your internet traffic will land it on this load balancer and it will distribute the traffic across the different zones. A single front-end IP address survive the zone failure if front-end IP may be used to reach all backend pool members. So these are our backend pool members. One or more availability zone can fail and the data path survive as long as the zone in the region remain healthy. So even if these two zone got out of order or something goes wrong with these two zone or with the virtual machine, the healthy zone will serve the client right whenever it receive the request on the load balancer. So let me show you how you can configure it. Meanwhile, once we create the virtual machine in the zone, so over 4 minutes will lapse. So then we will test it again. Okay, so let me go ahead and create the virtual machines. You can go to home and the virtual machine. So web 1 is already created. Let's create web 2 and web 3. Web 02, availability zone, and it's zone 2, just to correlate it with the name. And server will be data center, and that's fine. Let me copy the password and allow HTTP and HTTPS just for the sake of demonstration. Anyway, for web server, I need to allow that. Database, it was okay. So here, just delete it and create. Create. Okay, deployment in progress. So let me go ahead and create our web 03, web 03 availability zone, and zone will be third one, 100 security feature, and that's fine. Allow HTTP and HTTPS. I will use, okay, leave it as it is and delete the public. Okay, so web 02 is creating and okay, it's done. Now the third one is going on. So now we are going to play with the zone redundant. So web 01 I have already created in zone 1. Web 02 is in process in zone 2 and web 03 is also in process under zone 3. Okay. So let me access this web 02 as well. Why this showing a warning? Let me connect it. Let's see. I'm able to access web 02. And mm, let's access web 03 as well. So this is my web 03. Okay, so I believe now we can refresh it. 4 minutes passed. Refresh it. Uh, Still zone 2. Okay, here you can see now it is showing DB1 zone 1. In fact, same thing we can check now through Web02 and Web03 as well. Which VM it is? It is Web03. So let me exit from here. So you can see the functionality of our internal load balancer because these VMs are within the same VNet, within the same local network. So there should not be an issue. 10.0.0.7. Okay, it take me to DB02. Okay, so this is DB3, Web 2. Let me access through Web 2. And 007 is our load balancer IP. Again, it take me to DB02. So this is my Web02 and this is my Web01. As you can see, Web01 is going to Web0 DB01 if you refresh it, but still time 4 minutes time is there. So once the 4 minute times pass, then only it will shift the traffic. Okay, it's 2. As you can see now, and this is my Web01 machine, which is hitting to DB01, which is in zone 1. Web02 is forwarding the traffic to DB02, and Web03 is again connecting on DB02, right? So just refresh it multiple times. So once see now it is taking to DB03. So this is how internal load balancer works. So now it's time to check the functionality of zone-based load balancer. So in order to configure it, I will use the same environment. So three VMs I have configured with internal load balancer because database is something which is locally available. And these web server, for these three web server, I will configure a public load balancer because these web servers are entertaining the traffic which is coming from the internet, and these database will serve the, the traffic which are landing on eh, these three virtual machines. So let me go ahead and let me show you the diagram first, what I'm going to do now. So in in the previous video, I have configured internal load balancer, not in the previous video, in the previous session. So these three VMs I have configured and named them with DB1, DB2, and DB3 with the internal load balancer. And now I have configured three VM Web01, Web02, and Web03. And these three VM will connect with the public load balancer. So internet user will send the traffic to this public load balancer. Then this load balancer shift the load or distribute the load across these three virtual machines. And these three virtual machines will send the traffic to internal load balancer IP, and this load balancer IP will send the traffic to these three database VMs. So now I am going to configure public load balancer. In order to configure it, let's go ahead and click on load balancer. So DB load balancer is already there. Now I'm going to configure the web load balancer. Again, the resource group will be same, or this is web LB. Region is same. And now it's time to select the public because the web will entertain the public traffic. Create a front end IP, add front end IP. Let's give it a name and the public IP for web public IP. And it is a zone redundant, so we will select that zone redundant because the VM which we have created web 01, 02, and 03 in respective zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. So that is the reason I'm selecting zone redundant here. Okay, just review and create. Validation path, click on create. Now it's creating public IP. Take a couple of minutes. So the deployment is completed now. So let's go to resources and the public IP is assigned. Now we need to configure the backend pool, load balancing rule, and the scope. In order to configure it, the backend pool, click here on the backend pool and configure the backend pool which you have created like web VMs. Let me show you. These web VM will be part of our backend pool. Click on add. Let's give it a name. Let's say web pool. Virtual network will be the same as it is showing DB01 because first of all we have created DB01 VM. So it detect the name and create the virtual network automatically. So don't worry about the name. So here we have to select our web 01, 2, and 3. These VM will be part of the web pool. Save. These are very small tasks, but the thing is we have to perform them in sequence. Otherwise, we, we may face some issues if we did not follow the sequence. And sometimes these tasks are dependent on some tasks. If you did not perform them, you cannot uh, move ahead, right? So we need to follow the sequence, like create a load balancer, then front end IP, then back end IP, then health probe, then load balancer. So if I skip this health probe and directly go to the load balancer, I just show you it will ask for health probe and it is not available. Again, we need to create it from here. So instead of creating it, just follow the sequence. as it is already there first, second, third, fourth, so it would be easy for us. Okay, so it's web as probe HP. It is not Hewlett Packard, but it's called probe, right? So what it will do is it monitor the TCP protocol on port 80. If somehow it is not getting response from any server which is in the backend pool, it will declare as down or critical. So it will not send the traffic. So as you can see here, this Web 01 is in availability zone 1, Web 2 in zone 2, and VM 3 is in zone 3. So now it is time to configure our load balancer rule. So it's web LB rule. The front end IP is this one. Just if you notice that, or if you select the public, it will give you the public IP. If you select the internal, it will get the IP from your internal network. Let me show you the load balancer and click on DB load balancer because this one we have created for internal. So you look at here, see this is private IP because we have created for internal network because database is our internal, but for web it is our public, so it's second public IP. The backend pool is web pool which we have created in backend, and the port is 80. If there is a customized port, you can select that one and health probe, the one which we have just created. And again, for this one as well, the idle timeout is 4 minutes. And this is the minimum. You cannot reduce it. All right. So this is ready now. So now it's time to configure our web servers. So I'll go ahead and copy the same file which we have created for our database servers. So now it's time to configure it for the web servers. So this is my web server one, which was testing the load for the database. Now we will test it with the public IP. So let me configure the IAS. This is Web 01. Again, this is the same process which you have seen in the last session when we were configuring for database. It's same thing for Web 02. Let me close it and create IAS rule. This is Web 02. And this is my Web 03. Let's close it. Add roles and feature. This is Web 03. IAS. All right. Go back to Web 01 and wait. Once it is installed, then we will. Okay. Meanwhile, I'll do is I'll change the file name, and instead of DB01, now this is our Web 01 installed in zone 1. Just save it. Save as on the desktop, index.html. I'm just saving the time. So and the later on we just copy this index file. And okay, it's done. So let me go ahead and place that index file in the root directory of the network. Okay, just remove these files and move it here. So web server 1 is done. Just copy this file and move it to web 02. Okay, IIS installed, and directly go ahead and init pub directory. Remove these files and paste it here and rename it. It's web 02 installed in zone 2. So just save as it index.html and save as type all files. So this file is available here. Just close it and move to web 03. Okay, IIS is installed here as well. Remove these files. This is my uh, need to copy it again from web 01. This is web 03. Okay, just move it here. Web 03 installed in zone 3. Just save as it index.html and type his all files. So now we have this file on our web 03 as well. Now this is the time to start the show. So let's go ahead on the load balancer public IP. Click on see more and this is the IP, just copy it. And now we can test it from our own machine because it is available publicly. So just remove it and hit enter. Here we go. So the first traffic landed on web 01, which is on zone 1. So let me copy this and try to test with the different browser, Chrome. Again, it is in web 1 and zone 1. So if we wait for 4 minutes and then refresh it, it will take us to see. Earlier it was on web 01, now it is on web 02. So this is how I am trying to access from here somewhere. It, it landed on the public zone, public load balancer. It redirect me first on web VM 01, and then on the second time it redirect me to web 02. And if the web is getting something from the database, so in the web you have to define the database IP as internal load balancer IP. Then your traffic will hit on the load balancer and then load balancer will distribute the traffic across the virtual machines. I hope this video is helpful for you. So stay tuned, keep watching. See you in next video.